All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going way beyond just a simple list of the 7 deadly sins. We're going to get into the source material and uncover what is, honestly, a surprisingly deep and intricate philosophical framework. So, let's get started.
This quote right here, this is our core idea. It frames these figures not as, just simple tempters, but as architects. They're building a complete destructive worldview to justify the soul's erosion. We're looking at a whole system, a lexicon of human fallibility.
So, the key concept to wrap your head around is this: sin as logic. The big idea is that every single vice isn't just a mistake or some kind of weakness. No, it's a coherent philosophy. It has its own internal rationale that's designed to justify itself. And honestly, that's what makes it so incredibly seductive and so dangerous.
So where does this descent begin? It starts inside, deep within the self. We're kicking things off with 2 sovereigns who turn our focus completely inward. They help construct a world where the individual ego is the only thing that matters, the only real metric of value. And of course, we have to start with the most famous of them all, Lucifer. His domain is pride, and his entire philosophy is built on one core idea, that self-exaltation isn't a sin, it's the ultimate truth. He represents that original rebellion, a fundamental rejection of any authority outside of the self.
So how does Lucifer's logic work? Well, it kind of unfolds in 3 stages. First, you've got the metamorphosis. He goes from reflecting light to trying to generate his own. Then comes the rationalization. Arrogance isn't a flaw, it's just a simple, clear-eyed realization of superiority. And finally, the ultimate claim, the big one. It is better to reign in ruin than to serve in harmony.
Okay, now let's pivot to Mammon. If Lucifer is obsessed with status, Mammon is obsessed with substance, or, accumulating it. For him, everything, from gold to souls, is just an asset waiting to be acquired, another line item in his cosmic portfolio.
And this really gets to the core of Mammon's worldview. He calls it the tragedy of the unowned. He looks at anything not owned, preferably by him, and sees it as a total waste, a kind of existential failure. In his philosophy, existence is only validated through possession. The whole world is just a collection of things waiting to be claimed.
And when you put them side by side like this, you can really see the 2 different paths to centering the ego. Lucifer seeks validation through his rank, which leads to this downfall from cold vanity. Mammon, on the other hand, seeks validation through accumulation, which only leads to an emptiness that can literally never be filled. 2 very different methods, but they point to the same core problem. So, once the ego has been established as the supreme ruler of everything, what happens next? Well, it starts to get hungry. It turns its gaze outward, and it starts seeking to either consume or covet the very essence of others. And this brings us to the masters of distorted desire.
So here we meet Asmodeus, the sovereign of lust. His philosophy is pretty straightforward. Desire isn't about connection, it's about consumption. It's a feast. But the real tragedy of his logic is that it's completely self-defeating. When you consume the object of your desire, you're just left with nothing but a deeper, more hollow hunger than before. And then there's Leviathan, lurking down in the depths. His domain is envy, and his logic is just so insidious. He argues that joy is a zero-sum game. If your neighbor is happy or they're successful, that's not their achievement. No, to Leviathan, that's a resource that has been stolen directly from you.
This quote just synthesizes the 2 perfectly. You see, both Asmodeus and Leviathan create a state of perpetual lack. Whether it's through that endless cycle of consumption or the constant bitterness of comparison, the result is the same: a soul that can no longer find fulfillment because it's lost the ability to simply appreciate.
Now, these internal voids, this hunger, this resentment, they can't be contained forever. Eventually, they have to go somewhere. And they erupt out into the physical world as these high-energy forces of pure waste and violence.
First up is Beelzebub, the Lord of the Flies. His philosophy is gluttony. He champions the absolute overconsumption of resources, not for nourishment, but in this totally futile attempt to fill a spiritual emptiness. And the inevitable result? Waste, rot, decay.
Now, in stark contrast to the sort of passive waste of gluttony, we have Satan, the sovereign of wrath. And listen, this isn't the cold, calculated pride of Lucifer. This is pure, hot fury. Satan represents the active, violent tearing of the social fabric through rage that has been cleverly repackaged as righteous.
And this is how he does it. This is the three-part logic of sanctified rage. First, there's the intellectual justification. You frame the anger as inherently just. Second, moral sanctification. You present violence as a righteous response. And finally, the existential identity. You start to champion conflict itself as the truest expression of who you really are.
So we've gone from the internal ego to distorted desire to external destruction. I mean, what could possibly be next? Well, it's the final and maybe the most insidious stage of all, the complete shutdown, the cold erosion of the will to act at all.
And for that, we meet Belphegor, the sovereign of sloth. See, he doesn't destroy with fire and fury. No, he uses a quiet whisper. Tomorrow will come. Ignore the burden. It's a philosophy of pure inaction, a brilliant and terrible psychological trap that just slowly freezes the soul in place.
And you can see the progression right here. It all starts with procrastination, right? Finding clever ways to justify delay. This inevitably leads to neglecting your duties, both to yourself and to others. And finally, you reach the last stage, a complete erosion of motivation, the point where the very capacity to even care is extinguished. It's a total spiritual collapse.
Okay, so we've journeyed through the entire hierarchy. Now, let's bring it all together and look at the complete lexicon, the full philosophical framework laid out in one place.
And here it is, the whole shebang. Each sovereign, their domain, and their core philosophical motto. From Lucifer's total rejection of authority, all the way down to Belphegor's elevation of apathy, you can really see how each one offers a complete, self-contained justification for a life's downfall.
So why does any of this matter? Well, because this framework shows that these aren't just random failings. Each one comes with its own logical shield to defend itself as truth. We see a really clear trajectory, from self-obsession to external destruction, and finally to total apathy. And by understanding them as philosophies, we can get way better at identifying their seductive logic, in our own lives and in the world around us.
And that brings us to one final thought. If each of these sins is really a complete, self-justifying system of logic, it raises a pretty provocative question. Which one of these philosophies do you think is the most difficult to escape, and why? Definitely something to ponder. Thanks for joining me.